Okay, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer on the foundations of macroeconomics. Look, I know you probably already follow the financial news, you know the major players, and you're definitely familiar with terms like GDP and inflation. But today we're zooming way out. We're going to look at the actual architectural framework behind all those metrics. We're exploring how a national economy functions as this massive, deeply interconnected system. And we'll see how the really complex levers of policy interact in the real world. So instead of just defining textbook concepts, we're going to look at the friction between them, the historical anomalies, and the structural challenges that policymakers literally face every single day. Basically, we're popping the hood to look at the entire engine, not just the individual gears.
Now, look at this quote. It's the government's job to be good parents of the country. I absolutely love this framing. Try picturing your national government as parents, and the whole country as their household. Just like any good parent wants to raise a, healthy, well-balanced kid, a government is trying to cultivate a robust and resilient economy. It's not just about throwing money at problems. It's about guiding development, setting some boundaries, and making sure the underlying structure allows the household to actually thrive. And honestly, history is absolutely full of examples of what happens when governments act as, well, frankly, terrible parents. Think about the reckless money printing that led to crippling hyperinflation in Weimar Germany or modern-day Zimbabwe. Or on the flip side, severe overregulation that completely stunts innovation and growth. That parental role is this super delicate balance of stepping in when it's vital and knowing exactly when to just back off and let the household walk on its own.
So if the government is playing the role of parents, what are their ultimate rules for a happy household? Well, they've got to carefully balance four main objectives. We're looking at economic growth, a low level of unemployment, a low and stable rate of inflation, and finally, an equitable distribution of income. Now, what makes this so fascinating isn't just the goals themselves, but the intense friction between them. Trying to balance all four is literally the ultimate high-wire act of macroeconomic policy. Take the classic Phillips curve dilemma, for example. Often, when an economy is booming and you finally achieve that coveted low unemployment, well, you inadvertently trigger higher inflation because workers have way more leverage to demand higher wages, which pushes prices right back up. It is incredibly rare to achieve all four of these simultaneously without some serious underlying tension. More often than not, fixing one problem just ends up exacerbating another.
To figure out if they're actually succeeding in this crazy balancing act, policymakers rely on three vital report cards. First up is the circular flow model. This basically maps the complex arteries of how capital moves back and forth between households, businesses, and the government. Second, we've got measures of economic activity, anchored by GDP and its related metrics, which calculate the total value of what the nation is actually producing. And third, there's the business cycle. This tracks the inevitable macroeconomic heartbeat, the expansions, the contractions, the booms, and the busts over time. It's actually these precise cycles that groups like the National Bureau of Economic Research use to officially call the exact peaks and troughs of an economy. They're the ones letting us know exactly when a recession officially begins and ends. Together, these three are the core diagnostic tools for any national economy.
Okay, but before we dig any deeper into those diagnostics, we really need to shift our perspective entirely. It's time for a major vocabulary upgrade. We've got to transfer our language from micro to macro talk. Now, you likely already get how individual people, firms, and localized markets make decisions. But macroeconomics, that's the study of the entire forest, not just a single tree. And the crazy thing is, the rules actually change when you scale up like that. Take the famous paradox of thrift, for example. In microeconomics, it's super responsible and beneficial for an individual household to save money during tough times, right? But in macroeconomics, if every single household in the country suddenly decides to hoard their cash and stop spending all at once, aggregate demand totally collapses, which triggers a severe recession. So what is entirely rational for you as an individual can be absolutely devastating for the collective.
Let's see how this shift scales up our core concepts, starting with the most foundational one. In microeconomics, we examine a single market, say the market for smartphones or commercial real estate. But in macroeconomics, that concept scales all the way up to the national economy. This encompasses absolutely all economic activity taking place within a country's borders. We theoretically put every single local market under one giant umbrella. But, to be totally honest, the modern reality is that this boundary is getting incredibly messy. With the rise of deep globalization and massive multinational corporations, the lines of what actually counts as a domestic economy are constantly blurred. I mean, if a phone is designed in California, assembled in China, and sold in Europe, measuring its true impact on a single national economy requires some highly sophisticated accounting.
Next, we scale up demand. While personal demand dictates your morning coffee purchase, the macro equivalent is aggregate demand, or AD. This represents the total demand for a nation's output of goods and services combined. We're talking the absolute sum of all consumer spending, business investment, government expenditure, and net exports, the whole shebang. Understanding what drives aggregate demand is literally the key to anticipating massive market movements. It's deeply psychological and highly reactive. It can be driven by consumer confidence, federal stimulus packages, or central bank interest rate cuts. We actually saw a historic, real-world example of this during the post-pandemic reopening. Trillions of dollars in saved capital and government stimulus hit the market all at the exact same time. It created this massive, totally unprecedented surge in aggregate demand that fundamentally reshaped the global financial landscape.
Now, flipping to the other side of the equation, a single bakery's output scales up to aggregate supply. This is the massive combined total supply of goods and services produced by all the industries across the entire country over a specific period. It is the absolute productive capacity of the nation. And just like demand, aggregate supply is incredibly vulnerable to systemic shocks and global bottlenecks. It's not just about local factories anymore. It's about the entire global supply chain. The 2021 semiconductor shortage is a perfect anchor for this concept. Think about it. A disruption in the supply of these tiny microchips halfway across the world somehow managed to halt automotive manufacturing globally. It violently contracted the aggregate supply from major economies and really proved just how deeply interconnected and honestly fragile our productive capacities truly are.
The crucial point here is understanding how specific price tags transform at this massive scale. Tracking millions of individual prices, mathematically impossible. Instead, macroeconomists use an average price level. This is an index tracking the average prices of a vast basket of goods and services over time. When this level rises, boom, we experience inflation. But how is it actually measured? Usually through metrics like the Consumer Price Index. And the really fascinating part is that this basket of goods is completely dynamic. To accurately reflect modern living, statisticians are constantly updating what's actually in that basket. Over the years, they've quietly removed things like VCRs and physical encyclopedias and replaced them with streaming service subscriptions and smartphones. The index evolves exactly as our spending habits evolve, which keeps the measurement grounded in reality.
Okay, let's finish up our core term translation. A simple quantity of a single item produced scales up to the grand total of national output. This is the total output of absolutely all the industries functioning within a country. It's essentially the ultimate measure of the size of the national economic pie, what we often express as GDP. But since we're looking at the bigger picture, it's really vital to recognize the severe limits of this measurement. National output measures pure production. It does not measure societal well-being. In fact, it notoriously excludes incredibly crucial elements of a functioning society, like unpaid domestic labor, community volunteer work, or under-the-table transactions. Furthermore, it completely ignores environmental degradation. A country could theoretically chop down all its forests and deplete its national resources to maximize short-term national output, looking fantastic on paper while heading straight for long-term ruin.
So, bringing it all together, understanding the interactions between these overarching shifts provides us with the ultimate macroeconomic matrix. It translates raw data into world-altering historical events. When aggregate demand severely drops, total output falls, and that throws us into a recession, much like the brutal, widespread contraction following the 2008 financial crisis. On the other hand, an unexpected surge in demand triggers inflation, which was heavily observed in the post-World War II economic booms when consumer spending rapidly outpaced production. Now, a sudden decrease in aggregate supply, that causes a dreaded supply shock, resulting in stagflation. That's where prices rise but output abruptly falls. It's exactly what the world endured during the infamous 1970s oil embargoes. And finally, a steady technological increase in supply leads to genuine economic growth, expanding national output and reliably raising the overall standard of living over decades.
So, we've explored the rules of the household, we've examined those foundational macroeconomic report cards, and we applied our upgraded vocabulary to real-world historical shifts. Now I want to leave you with a challenge. Take a really hard look at your own country's economy right now. Based on those 4 critical objectives we discussed, economic growth, low unemployment, stable inflation, and equity, how are things actually running? Are your leaders effectively navigating the intense friction between these goals? And maybe more importantly, when confronting today's unprecedented global shocks, are the parents of your economy adapting to the moment, or are they blindly relying on outdated parenting books to manage a distinctly modern crisis? Take some time to think about it, look closely at the data around you, and I'll see you in the next explainer.